Mm.
Hey, everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod with our MSU season recap brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, your go to source for betting on the sports you love to watch, whether it's college basketball or maybe baseball, although a rough start for the Tigers this year. Head on over to the App Store, download the FanDuel app today. Be glad you did and get going. Big thanks again to Michael Yoakum for his one time gift via PayPal to the show. If you appreciate what we're doing here at Tiff Nuts, head over to our support page and get the necessary links. You can do that at tffinots.com/support. Become a monthly supporter today so that we can recognize you occasionally and during the show, and we can also send you an ad-free version of the show. All right, Rod. Michigan State finished the season 27-8, 15-5 in the Big Ten, which was good for second place. Obviously, the specter of Michigan winning the league and then the national championships put a little bit of a damper in the season, especially for those insecure Spartan fans out there. But Michigan State has finished with the loss of UConn, of course, in the Sweet 16, their third Sweet 16 in the last 4 years. Before we get into specifics on each player, which we'll do in just a moment here, let's discuss maybe the effect that I think the two injuries had on the season. One is Caleb Glenn, and the other be Divine Ugochukwu. Both, I think, changed MSU's trajectories significantly, although one is probably harder to quantify to know what the effect would have on both whether he was playing and what he did as far as change rotation, allowing development of other players.
Yeah, we'll start with Caleb Glenn. I do think it's very difficult to know what effect that would have had. I can tell you this. He didn't practice for very long. It was a matter of, God, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks, something like that. I don't recall for sure, but it certainly wasn't a long period of time. But the early word that was coming out about him was extremely positive. And he had, let's keep in mind, this was a guy who was fairly highly rated recruit. He was definitely a top 100 guy who originally committed to Louisville, played a year there, unfortunately for him, a disastrous year where Louisville had one of the worst seasons a historically elite program has ever had.
Right.
I think they won 2 games, something like that. And then he had a great season at Florida Atlantic. So it wasn't crazy to think that Caleb Glenn would actually have a pretty good year. That was sort of the expectation. And I think the general belief was he was the best of the 3 portal guys they added. Now, there are going to be some that will say, "Oh, it's damning with faint praise." I don't care. I am not interested. I'm just telling you what the facts are. And then he got hurt and missed the entire season. Now, the other thing that has been made pretty obvious, I think, is that they considered him to be a fast healer because he was actually practicing for about the last month of the season, which was a little aggressive compared to what they thought it might look like in terms of his recovery back when he had the surgery in the summer. So that's a good sign. I've heard nothing to date that suggests that they're worried about him losing any athleticism as a result of the injury. He certainly, by the time practice comes around next year, he will have had,
just about a year,
8-9 months of practicing.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's in pretty good shape, I think, as far as that goes. What difference would he have made on this year's team? As you said, it's impossible to know. I have to be honest, it's a little difficult to imagine what that would have done because Caleb Glenn has a lot of strengths. One of them is not ball handling, and he's not any kind of combo player. He's 6'7", well put together. He's really a 3-4 hybrid kind of guy. So he wasn't the kind of player where an obvious fit and opportunity would have been there for him to get major minutes. You do wonder what it might have done to Jordan Scott's role. That's Jordan eventually settled into being a 2, but early on he was playing more at the other wing, backing up Coen Carr. Would
Exactly.
Caleb's presence have limited his development? Yeah, quite possibly. Would have given Michigan State another shooter. I know that, but I don't know that they needed that.
No,
This is
not
a
the
pretty
end. It
good
seemed like in the
3-point shooting
early.
team.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I don't know what the impact would have been. I think for next year, it's fairly obvious to see the impact. To me, he slots in as a guy, again, who's going to play the 3 and the 4. And you could see between backing up Coen and backing up Cam Ward, that's my working assumption, at least, that Cam Ward is your likely starter at the 4. Caleb would be the primary guy backing him up as a small ball type 4. But you could see the path to minutes there. And I do think he's going to be important. The thing that's worth mentioning, of course, is that at both those spots, at least as where they are right now, Michigan State does not have a great jump shooter at either the 3 or the 4.
Exactly.
So Caleb Glenn being a guy that you could play who gives you that, that could be very important. So everything I've heard says they feel very, very good about him for next season. And for right now, at least, my expectation is that he's going to be an important part of the rotation. So that's a nice addition to have, in addition to everybody else they're bringing in.
And then, of course, Divine, his injury, which we talked about quite a bit. I mean, we probably don't need to belabor it too much today, but and we'll go through his specific stats in just a moment and sort of, expectations for the future. But he definitely had an impact offensively a little bit, some shooting for sure. His ability to attack the lane at times, but primarily it was his defensive end that we saw. From then on, teams were able to be more effective offensively. And I think, the one thing that you talked about, that we talked about a number of times throughout the season too, when it came to Michigan State's defensive statistics, even when Divine was playing, is that from a shutdown kind of defense, they never were that. They just were the shut you down after one shot kind of defense.
Yep.
And then with his departure, that shutdownness got worse, certainly on the perimeter.
Well, yeah. And so here's the math on it's pretty simple. On the day that he got injured in that game against Minnesota, Michigan State came into that game the number 2 defense in America. They had been number 1 before the Michigan game, which was the game prior. Right. And then as a result of that game, those two teams flipped. But number 2 in the country, I believe they ended number 13. And so people might say, well, that's still very, very good. And it is. But that is not a good story to tell when you slip from 2 to 13 over the course of 6 weeks.
Right.
That says in screamingly loud neon lights problem.
Yeah.
And it correlates directly to Divine going down. Now, I'm not going to say that was the only reason, but these kind of things can tend to have something of a domino effect. And I think that's what we saw. Michigan State, with a healthy Divine Ugochukwu, had a guy who could, while not being a lockdown defender himself, was far and away the most consistent guy they had at that position. And it also gave them an option, a more realistic option they could use to take on a dynamic opposing guard and not have to task Jeremy with yet another thing that he had to do.
Yeah.
And so the effect was real. I think it was very obvious. And it was something that, given the way they were built, once he went down, there was nothing that they could do. The only thing you could have hoped for, really, in a realistic sense, was that Jordan Scott would somehow grow up even faster and find a level of consistency that lacked. Jordan Scott's got great defensive potential, and he had moments. The game he played against Keaton Wagler was fantastic. Yeah. It's not that Jordan Scott is a terrible defender. That's not it. But he wasn't as versatile and he wasn't as consistent as Divine was. And when Divine left, when he was out, that was gone. And so you had an inconsistent Jordan Scott, and worse than that in the other options. So that was a problem. The other issue that it created, and this falls a bit into the we'll never know category, but I do think we kind of know. I've been saying for, I think I've even said it in our post game, and maybe probably more than one. Jeremy Fears had arguably, if not the 3 least efficient games of his season,
Yeah.
three of the top 5.
Yeah.
Let's say, right at the end, the NCAA tournament. That is not coincidence, not an accident, and the reasons for it are very obvious to me. He had to play so many minutes, and not just minutes, but hard minutes. I just alluded to one element of that. He's your only reliable perimeter defender. So that means he's going to have hard assignments defensively more than you'd like. You'd like to be able to give him a few minutes where he could guard a secondary player. Well, MSU did not really have that option. And yet they would still try to do that, which helped make the defense worse. But I just think it was obvious, and this is something we talked about at the time. Michigan State had finally made the move in that Minnesota game to not start Devine at the 2, move him back to the primary point guard reserve. And the thought in my mind was, all right, they're finally going to be able to get to giving Jeremy the kind of rest that he needs to make sure the tank's not running on E come March. Well, then Devine gets hurt. That's over.
Yeah.
And it's no offense to Denham Wojcik. He did everything I think he could, but we talked about that a lot during the season. That was just limited. And I think you could see Michigan State trying the best they possibly could to manage that situation, but you've got limited options available to you. There's just not much. They had to lean on Jeremy. They had to.
Yeah.
And so by the end, you had a Jeremy Fears that was not the same guy he had been for the majority of the season. And I think that's why you saw him shoot inefficiently, have more turnovers than we were used to seeing. You know, he was still making plays. He obviously put up insane assist totals in those 3 games, but the efficiency was not where it had been all year. We're talking about a guy who was a very efficient player. All of a sudden he wasn't. Well, that's one of the things that tends to happen when you're tired.
Sure.
Your judgment is, you know, they say fatigue makes cowards of us all. It didn't make Jeremy a coward, but it tends to mean your decision making, your judgment, and your ability to just execute is not where it optimally would be. And so in that sense, Devine's absence was really important too, because I do think if he had been healthy, again, I can't prove it because it didn't happen, but I think if he had been healthy, I don't know where Jeremy would have been, but he would have been in a better place than where he was.
Yep.
That
I think so too. Yeah. 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 I guess the pessimist might say, well, you know, Jeremy's worst 3 games might have been the 3 NCAA tournament games. Maybe the stage was too big, but that certainly never bothered him during the regular season. Didn't bother him last season. So that is not something I would worry about. It was just,
I mean, again, I
can't year thing.
I can't prove it, but
of course,
this is what I don't need to.
Yeah.
Guys, you have any experience playing, even just watching.
Yeah.
You know this. And it was predictable. It was predictable. It was something
we talked about it before it happened. Yeah.
All year long.
Yeah.
All year long, we talked about it. And it's exacerbated by the fact that this team put even more on Jeremy than maybe we would normally see. You know, again, your best perimeter defender, that was him. Your floor leader, that was him. At a certain point in the season, he emerged as the number 1 scoring option. So he's your top scorer. I mean, that's a ton to put on anybody.
Yeah.
Never mind at Michigan State where everything goes through the point guard. It's just, it was too much given that he was not able to get quality rest. The other thing too is, and I want to just, before we wrap up on that, I just want to make sure my point here is clear. The minutes themselves were hugely important, but even more so, it's the type of minutes. Watch for a contrast the way Iowa used Sturts this year.
Mhm.
You watched him more than I did even, but I know this to be the case. How many sets, what percentage of sets was Sturts spending half the set standing in the corner? A lot, right?
Yeah, half at least. Yeah, for sure.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting that's what MSU should do. I don't think so. I'm not a fan of that. But it goes to show you that all minutes are not created equally. The minutes that Sturts played, his 35, was not equal to the 35 that Jeremy would play in terms of the work. So that's got to be kept in mind too.
Yeah, and the fatigue thing is interesting. We talk about that, and I think everyone accepts that. Especially when you look at like college refereeing, right? You have people who are traveling 6 days a week, like on planes, and doing 6 games or 7 games in a week. You can't imagine that fatigue doesn't affect them as well. We talk about all the time, and people accept that, but it's like, when you mention a player, like, well, they're young kids, they should be able to handle whatever. And I guess you could say, well, he handled it, but it just not as efficiently as you'd hope. And so
there's look, if the only silver lining to this is, I would hope, and I know it's a foolish hope because people are stupid, you would hope that this season would kill dead any idea from dummies that, I don't know why Tom Izzo doesn't play these guys 35 minutes. They play that many minutes at school X, school Y, school Z. Well, it's not the same. You're not asking the same thing. Those teams aren't asking the same things of their players that Izzo is asking of his. He has a system. He has a mode of play and a way they play, and it's one that requires a lot of energy. And no, it's not. Michigan State's players are well conditioned. They don't need to look at the team nutritionist. None of that garbage. It's a reality. The reality is, because of the way they play, you're not going to be able to get maximum level of output from guys who are continually playing 35 minutes or, God help us, more a night. It just doesn't happen. So you've got to there's a reason why Tom Izzo plays 9, 10, sometimes even 11 guys in a rotation. That's why, and I'll say this. If you flash back a year prior, that team, which had more depth than this one, didn't have those issues. That wasn't why they lost. It wasn't that you looked at multiple players or even one key player and said, boy, it just seems like the last 4 or 5 games, we could see it. The season is just wearing him down. I don't think that was the case. That's not why Michigan State went out. Now, I should also hasten to add, in all this talk about, what if with Devine, I still don't think that put Michigan State on par with Michigan, Arizona, a healthy Duke. Might they have gone further? Might they have gotten to a Final Four? Possibly. We'll never know. They're pretty close as it was.
Yeah.
Down where they were. But I think it would have, what you could say is, it would have given them a better chance to move forward than the one they had. And it would have given them a more significant puncher's chance if they'd had an opportunity to play one of those teams I just mentioned. The Michigan State team that actually existed, I don't think had much of a chance, 10% or less against a Michigan, let's say. If they'd been full strength, I don't know, but it would have been a higher percentage than that.
Right.
So that's where it really, and this is the other thing too. I think that, and this might be, I mentioned this on the Spartan Mag board yesterday, this might be a controversial opinion. I don't know, but it's one I do hold. The Michigan State team that was healthy with Divine, so not counting Caleb Glenn, but the one we had until early February, I think was a better team overall than the year prior.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I
I
think
think
the
any
team
question.
I think the team that we actually had in the NCAA tournament this year was not as good as the one that was in the NCAA tournament the year prior. That's how much the Divine injury, for all the reasons I talked about, changed the trajectory of this team.
Yeah. No, I think if you compare the two teams, offensively, this was a better team. Defensively, it was not quite as good. And then certainly with the loss of Divine, the defense got quite a bit worse than last year's team. And that's probably where you'd say the difference is
the
as far as
defense,
their quality
here's
team.
the thing. The defense was better this year than last year. It was better until he got hurt.
Yeah.
The one we had in March was not better. The one prior to that was better. And now the funny thing is, it does need to be mentioned in the interest of fairness. The offense got better when Divine went down.
Right.
I don't know that I correlate that to anything except maybe the team shooting the ball a little more consistently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When he went out, he was the only reliable outside shooter at that time, I think.
Well, Jaxon had a very good year.
Yeah, that's true, Jaxon. But as far as from the guards, it was pretty much him.
I still think overall you're talking about a team that had been improved prior, and then once he went down, I don't think it was quite as good.
Yeah, and we're talking about teams that were one game difference in the NCAA tournament, Elite Eight versus.
I'm not saying it's a decisive, oh my God, night and day, but I do think this was, and the reason I think that is, I think this team was right there defensively with that group, but I think offensively, it was not a clean comparison because there were things that the year prior did better. For example, the year prior was a top 50 team in offensive foul rate. They got to the line much more often than this team did.
Yeah.
So that was one way that team was better, but this team clearly shot jumpers better. And I think you can argue the year prior had obviously more guys who had dynamic offensive potential because you had Jaden Akins, you had Trey Holloman, you had Jace Richardson, you also had Jeremy Fears, all of whom could handle the ball, could make plays for themselves or others, all of that. This team really had one post Divine. But that one was at such a high level that I don't know if I wouldn't take that. Right. It's an interesting discussion, but anyway.
Well, before we talk about the departing players, the caveat, of course, for all this is that there's some we know are leaving, and then there's some question marks and there's some certainty and there's some uncertainty, I guess. As long as the portal is open, which is open for another 2.5 weeks, something like that, anything's possible. So we won't make any jumping conclusions. These are sort of our best guess. But just to remind you, of course, that is one thing you don't have to guess about is that it is going to be wet. I think it's going to rain every day next week. So that means you make sure your gutters are functioning properly. And if they're not, make sure you call the Brothers Just Do Gutters. They do fantastic work. They can take care of things. They can fix them up. They can repair them, clean them out. If you haven't done that, whatever you need done, the brothers can take care of that. Whether you're on the east or the west side of the state, Greg and Kurt will take great care of you. They give you 10% off simply by mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate. And of course, you can do that at our support page. The Final Four is not thescatter.com/support, or you can find the links to get an estimate at tiffnuts.com/support if you're lazy, don't want to type so much. All right, so we're going to start with the departing players. And of course, we'll begin with Jaxon Kohler, who averaged 12.5 points a game, shot 50, 39, 87 this year, 8.9 rebounds a game, 2.9 were offensive, had a 1.3 to 1.3 so assist to turnover ratio, averaged a little over half a steal a game, and 0.7 blocks per game. So I think, earlier in the season, I think you would have expected these numbers to be a little bit elevated as far as his points per game. He went in that slump in out west, and I would say never quite got back to where he was prior to that.
Yeah, that's fair.
From a rebounding standpoint, probably not quite where he was. And I don't know if that's a reflection more of other guys stepping up and getting a little more rebounds, but
I think it was a little
yeah,
bit. Look, he's still on balance. If I'd said before the season, he's going to give you whatever it was, 12 and a half and 9.
yeah,
I think everybody, and shoot the way to those numbers that you mentioned, efficiency wise. I think people would have been reasonably satisfied with that, and it would have fallen definitely into the range of realistic good expectations. So I think Jaxon had a very nice senior year. You're right that the way he played early brought about the suggestion that, oh, maybe this is actually half a level better than that. You know, maybe he could be a double guy on a night in, night out basis.
yeah.
And because that boy in the first half of the season, he rolled up a bunch of those.
Well, we were talking like, first team Big Ten. I mean, it was a really impressive opening of the season.
It looked right. It looked like, you might have been talking about 16 and 10.
Yep.
Instead of 12 and a half and 9. But as you say, and it happens to shooters, he had a period of time, and I'm with you in that I don't think he ever quite got back to that level he was at, say, in November and December. But he did pull out of the worst of the nosedive, and certainly had some impactful shooting games down the stretch of the season and into the tournament. But overall, and I think, something that doesn't get a lot of attention, but should, is like a lot of other guys before him, Jaxon Kohler got better defensively every year, to the point that this year, functional is the least you could say about it. I think you could actually start edging into some form of good territory in terms of what he provided for Michigan State on the defensive end, especially relative to what expectations would have been, because he does have some physical limitations. You don't ever question the work ethic with Jaxon. At least I don't. He's going to give you everything he's got, and we know that he gives them everything he's got on his own time, the stuff that we don't see. But he's not a particularly athletic guy, and he's not, for the position, a particularly big guy either. I think he gets pretty close to max out of the physical tools he's got. But those physical tools do bring limitations in that are going to mean, he doesn't have the defensive potential that someone like Carson Cooper had. He just doesn't, because of physical differences. It's not about want to, it's not about work ethic. He just doesn't have that same kind of physical potential. So they got somewhere pretty close to his best defensively. And that was important because, early in his career, I did start his first 2 years. I'll be honest. I mean, I wondered, is there a defensive position for Jaxon? Because I
remember talking about that.
I didn't know if he could ever guard fours adequately, and he certainly did that. And I worried about him as time went on. I worried about him against truly big fives in the post. So it kind of felt like, well, there's a man without a country, but that's not how it played out. So full credit to him. So I think he had a good year. I think he doesn't have anything to hang his head about. He would have wanted more, especially given the way the first couple months unfolded. But I'm not going to complain about the production Michigan State got from him. He had a good year.
Next, we'll go to next door, Carson Cooper. Carson finished with 11.1 points per game, shot 58-40. Now that's very limited volume, 2 for 5, obviously, and 79% from the line, 7.1 rebounds a game, almost 2 offensive rebounds a game. Had a 1-to-1 assist turnover ratio, 1.4 to 1.4. Had about a little over half a steal a game and had a block a game. And I think when we were talking about Carson before the season started, we expected more. We expected to continue growth defensively and that he would continue to be solid there. I don't think either of us expected double-digit scoring from Carson, shooting 58% from the field. I mean, that's obviously a lot of rim run stuff, but he's stretched his game quite a bit. 80% from the line practically was super impressive. And even the rebounding picked up, especially at the end of the season. He had a really, really good year. And, I know people talk about this a lot, but you would love to see one more year with Carson. Obviously that's not going to happen. But to see what the next level could have been, because I think could be pretty impressive. I think you've mentioned a number of times his best basketball is probably ahead of him. I mean,
I don't think there's any doubt. I don't think there's any doubt. And I'm still, we'll see if it happens, but I'm still putting myself on record for the nothing that matters that Carson Cooper is going to play NBA basketball. I don't know for how long. I don't know when, but I'm firmly convinced it will happen. Because I just think I just mentioned it a second ago, his combination of size at a legit 6'11", he's gotten stronger every year, and I think still probably has some upside there to reach. But you put that together with his ability to move, that's a rare thing. That is, and guys who have those traits tend to have a real shot to play at the next level. And I don't just mean somewhere in Europe.
Right.
And so that's why, and the fact that his slope of improvement shows every year and doesn't seem to be slowing down. That's another factor. I do think he's going to be a better basketball player, maybe much better, 2 years from now than he was this season. Well, imagine what that looks like.
Yeah.
What we saw this season with him was the one thing that I think many people questioned if they'd ever see, which was legitimate offensive growth.
Right.
It wasn't the 58%. Yeah, it had a lot of dunks. Wasn't just dunks.
Right, exactly.
Carson Cooper became a pretty reliable mid-range shooter. And that was something I don't think anybody foresaw. You saw him make, and it's not like this was fully developed, but you saw hints of a post game starting to develop. Some of the spin moves he made, occasionally facing people up and taking them off the dribble, things that you never dreamed of with him, even year before last, were showing up. If he had another year to play, yeah, I mean, I think you'd be talking about an all Big Ten center. So, full credit to him. We talked about Jackson's work ethic. Well, it's obviously there with Carson too. I think it would be pretty tough to argue against the idea that talking about the totality of things he did and the consistency with which he did them, Carson Cooper was Michigan State's second best player this year. Certainly second most consistent.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that on a given night, Jaxon or Coen might be able to do more offensively, especially, but consistency and level of play, I think Carson was your number 2 guy. It's funny. I had a conversation with somebody who knows the game and the program very, very well. And he was talking about how late in the season, Izzo would occasionally in press conferences be bemoaning Carson's defense. And we both said, boy, it's not going to take very long in the next season before he's going to be wishing he had that to count on. And he knows that. And it's also part of it's a sign of respect for Carson that Tom Izzo thinks so highly of him defensively that anything less than the absolute standard is a massive problem. Whereas it wouldn't cause an eye to bat with somebody else,
Right.
But yeah, he had a great year, and couldn't be happier for him. I mean, we've gotten to, we would never claim to know these kids, but we've gotten a chance to speak to them all, pretty much all, at length over the years. And he's definitely one of my favorites because he was such an easygoing kid. He came here with really almost no expectations, absolutely no hype. And you look at what he made himself into, and he did it with a smile, and everything you hear about him in terms of the role he played in the program with younger teammates. You couldn't ask for more. He was helpful to us, even, I think I've mentioned this elsewhere, but I know in helping us try to corral some of his teammates for interviews. He's a guy that helped us once or twice. So definitely one of my favorites. And as a Michigan kid too, in an era where we have fewer of those than we once did,
Yes.
that also matters too to me, just quite candidly. So hats off to him for a great career. One of the really great beginning to end progression stories. I don't know where it ranks all time. I have to think about that more deeply, but it's up there. That much I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Carson was one of our favorites, and he definitely made it until the Michigan State Sports Information shut him down. He was very, very helpful getting player interviews and stuff.
That's right.
Moving on then, of course, to Trey Fort, transfer in from Samford. He ended up averaging 4.2 points a game, shot 35, 34, 89, had averaged 1.3 rebounds a game. 0.2 of those were offensive. He had about 0.6 to 0.6 assists to turnover per game, 0.2 steals a game, 0.2 blocks a game. Trey's, we talked about this many times during these season, especially at the end. This year did not go in any way that I'm sure the way he's hoped, the way we expected. A lot of people expected a lot more from him from a scoring standpoint, from just, being able to just be on the floor. And it became pretty apparent early on that just defensively, he was not where Michigan State needed him on the perimeter. And whatever he'd give you offensively was negated by what he gave up defensively. And then I think that bled into his offensive game. He started losing confidence in his shot. And then at the end, like any good story, right? Suddenly he has like a rebirth awakening at the very end of the season, Big Ten tournament against UCLA and through the NCAA tournament. He started shooting and just looked finally for the first time really all season comfortable on the floor, and defensively not as much of a problem. But of course, the season was over. It was too late to really have as big an impact as probably many anticipated. And so I don't know if this is one of those things where I know people talk about transfers coming in and we saw this certainly Tyson Walker, but you just kind of need that first year to sort of figure things out defensively where you are, and that it's going to be tough within Izzo's system to have a 1-year transfer come in and be really impactful. I mean, I don't know how much credence you put into that, but certainly he struggled, and we've seen that from other players too, that they sort of takes them a little while to sort of get acclimated to the MSU way.
Yeah, it did. And I think it was, you can call it a misevaluation, and I wouldn't push back on that. I don't think anybody involved would, because in the end, it what it is proves out, right? You see it.
Right.
But their internal expectations were much higher. They thought they'd solved that position, at least adequately, with adding him. But the defensive end just never came around until late. And then it did. And you saw what he was capable of doing. That's the shame of it.
Yeah.
Is that if he had been able to be functional defensively earlier, you would have gotten even more offense out of him. And here's the other thing too. I think Trey Fort had a chance. We never really saw it. But I think if he had really settled in, I'm not going to call him a point guard, but he had some off the dribble ability. I think he could have taken at least a little bit of burden off Jeremy's shoulders if he'd been trustworthy, but he wasn't for most of the season. I'm glad for him, and obviously glad for MSU, because it mattered that he was able to have those moments at the end and be something of a lesson in terms of the value of perseverance, that it's never over until it's over, Yeah. And he was an example of that. But yeah, overall, obviously disappointing for him, disappointing for Michigan State that they weren't able to get more. But honestly, all you needed were eyes to see the problem. It was glaringly obvious.
Right. Well, and it's somewhat remarkable because I think both of us, certainly by February, had sort of said, well, he's just not going to find his way onto the floor, really. And yet there at the end of the season, he was there. And it was, that was the most shocking thing, I think, to me, that a guy who pretty much was played himself out of the rotation had somehow made his way back in, and not because of other people faltering too much. It's just, he just kind of managed to do what needed to be done. And maybe that was partly because of the struggles at UCLA. But anyway, it was kind of neat to see that at the end of the season. It's just, again, too bad that it happened at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And then, of course, go ahead. You want to?
No, that's.
Yeah. And then finally, for departing players, Denham Wojcik, who was the real late addition as the emergency point guard added from Michigan State after they added Devine on the portal. And of course, he ended up playing more than emergency. Well, he was the backup point guard. He averaged a half point a game, shot 29, 0, 50 for the season, 0.2 rebounds a game, 1.1 to 0.4 assist to turnovers a game. So almost a 3-to-1 assist turnover ratio, 0.3 steals a game, no blocks. And he became the whipping boy for quite a while. His is a strange arc too in the season because he was inserted into the lineup as the backup while Devine was healthy, which seemed like a strange move. And then it turned out to be sort of prescient later on. That was very helpful that he had all that experience. So,
that's true.
But I know that was not the expectation that, of course, Devine would get injured and that you wanted him as a backup.
I had this conversation again the other night, as I mentioned, with somebody who knows generally and specifically with the program. And both of us were going over that. And I don't think either one of us ever got to feeling where we had the answer as to why December and January happened the way they did at that position. Other than Devine Ugochukwu was not the kind of vocal leader that Tom Izzo demands, and that was the reason why that he was trying to, one, that he thought his team needed it on the floor, and two, he was trying to teach to get more out of Devine in that way. It's the only thing either one of us could conclude.
Yeah, no, I think so too.
And I still, very rarely, usually even when it's one of these take a hit now to get a benefit later kind of moves, I can see it over the course of time with Izzo. Like I feel like I understand it. This was one I never felt like I understood it. And you're right that it ended up actually being a positive in a way that he had played those minutes, because when Devine went down, they had no choice. So Denham had more time. And, look, I think he gave his max. I really do. My objections with his play only have to do with the physical limitations on the defensive end. That's the thing too. My issues tended to not be the same ones that most people seem to have from what I observed. Most people got hung up on the offense. Well, the offense was not terrible. It wasn't optimal. I'm not pretending that, but it wasn't terrible when he was on the floor. It was enough to get by with for those minutes, because with your best player off the court and your best player is your point guard, they would have taken a hit if Devine was playing those minutes.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
They were never going to be that. This is just not realistic. But offensively, it was not the problem. It was the defensive end, because Denham just physically would get swallowed up. And that was the issue. But I think he gave maximum effort. He certainly did have some positive moments this year, especially later in the year. I think he did play better. But, any team in the country, when you're going to your third string point guard, there's going to be an issue. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. It was just that interval, that 2 months or whatever, 6 weeks or whatever, that was just kind of strange and sort of trying to figure out what's going on. But it definitely seemed like we have an opportunity here to show Devine what we're looking for and get a little bit of riding the pine, I guess, in order to get that message.
Look, I get that, the argument you'll usually hear from people is, why aren't they investing? That's usually the word. Right. In other words, what it means is, well, you play somebody and you let them play through mistakes and they learn that way. Well, that's never been Tom Izzo's MO. Never, ever, 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 ever. He'll let you play through a few, but it's not going on indefinitely. And at some point, it will stop. And the teaching will begin with playing the old Bob Knight line about, the best teacher being rear end on bench.
Right.
But this was one where I just felt I didn't understand it. Let's just leave it at that. I never understood it. And like I say, most of the time when moves that tend to upset the baying hordes happen, I can see the logic to it. This one I just never did.
Yeah.
But that's probably a me problem. So
yeah, well, and that's the more than anything, it's like there's incomplete information, right? And so that you just
100%,
there's things that right
100%.
and that we there's only so much we can see. I mean, we can see.
I mean,
stuff,
I think I know.
I
do think I know what it was. I think it's some. I think it's some version of Divine was not giving them the specific things they wanted at that spot, and it wasn't changing.
Right.
When
that's probably the key too.
And so they decided we gotta make a shift here to try to get this thing where it needs to be for March. Now, yeah, I do think, of course, it's interesting that the game Divine got hurt was the one where Jordan Scott became the starter at the 2. Divine moved back to a reserve role, and he was playing point guard, which he honestly, it's not even that, he'd been supplanted as the backup, because he was starting at the 2 during that time. So it wasn't like his minutes went down, but his role shifted. He was barely ever playing on the ball at all during December and January. I mean, it wasn't like they're saying, all right, we're going to give you 3 minutes instead of 8. It was 0 minutes instead of 8 on the ball. That is also part of what I didn't quite get.
Yeah. Well, I think, probably at the time too, not to go too much to you, but I think we didn't appreciate how important he was defensively either. I think,
not fully.
See that,
I knew he mattered, but not fully.
Not right. Not to the extent, and it's obviously clear to the coaching staff. So they probably felt like they still need him on the floor in order, for his defense. And then, I mean, at some point, you tell someone something 30, 40 times and they're just not getting, you're like, well, we need a different way of trying to get through to this person. And I'm sure that's what that sort of is about, like moving him off the ball. But, whatever. Either way, it's water under the bridge, right? So they say. So speaking of water, let's talk about the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Those guys will come out and they'll take care of your window cleaning needs, whether it's actually they'll even wash your house. They'll get up on a ladder and they'll get close. So they're not going to like blast away from 50 feet, tearing off the paint off the side of your house. So Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids will take care of those things. Call them today. It's spring. Get all that grime off from the winter. You can head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can get an estimate from Troy and his team. Even if you're not in Grand Rapids, if you're anywhere within reasonable distance, like a couple 100 miles or so, call them first, whether it's your home, your business, whatever it might be. Don't forget, you get 15% off simply by mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate. Again, that's at tffinots.com/support. Do it today. You'd be really glad you do. And so we're going to talk about the returning players. And it's funny, I was doing through the returning players, and then I totally skipped over our first one here, Jeremy Fierce Jr. I'm like, there's someone else I'm just missing. And like, oh my, I just need to do Jeremy. So he ended up with 15.2 points a game, shot 43, 32, and 89, 2.4 rebounds a game to 0.4 offensive rebounds. He had 9.6 to 2.5 assist to turnovers game. So at 328 assists to just 85 turnovers this season. He also averaged 1.3 steals, had a block in the season, but so doesn't even come out to even 0.1 blocks a game. So anyway, fantastic season. I think he undoubtedly was much better than we anticipated this year that he was going to be. I think we both thought he was going to be better, but he exceeded that from just about every aspect of the game. And maybe defensively, you could say he wasn't any better because he was really good the year before. But from his scoring, from his ability to finish at the rim, his shooting was even better probably than expected. And it's certainly at the line. I mean, what a difference. I think last year he shot 70% or so, not bad, 70-some percent, and almost, he's over 90% most of the year. He was just about automatic. So I don't know what more you can say about him. He's he's certainly going to be on the top of the list for National Player of the Year next year, right?
Yeah. Right now, he's, and I think conservatively, you would say he is among the leaders for preseason National Player of the Year. I think he was, and this was in an incredibly high level group. I think he was the best point guard in the Big Ten. I think he had an argument, and it really comes down to what things you value most in a point guard. He had an argument as the best point guard in America. I think most people would probably go with Darius Acuff right now, and I wouldn't argue against that, but they're different kinds of players.
Yep.
Yeah, I had very high expectations for Jeremy, and I've had them since he committed. I firmly believed from that point, this is the next great Michigan State point guard. I do not think it is an accident that since Jeremy has been able to actually play meaningful minutes, Michigan State basketball has recovered from, what, and it tells you a lot about where the program's been, that you would describe that period as a malaise, but the post-COVID malaise that people talk about has been eradicated the last 2 years. Why? Well, there's several reasons, but the biggest to me is they got a Michigan State point guard back.
Yeah.
And a high-level one. I'm not surprised by the way he ran the team, the assists, all that. That part did not surprise me at all. The scoring did surprise me. I did not expect him to be quite the scorer that he was. Some of that was forced on him.
Yeah.
That there were a lot of situations, especially in that stretch in the middle of the season, where he was regularly putting up, 20 to 30 point games, where that was happening because he had to go get them baskets.
Right.
And you can argue that, I think you can go back and forth on it as to what that said about the team. But regardless of that, he proved he could do it. And that was a gear we had not seen from him at this level. Well, we've seen it now. I do think that, as we talked about earlier, the minutes and the kind of minutes that he had to play really did take a toll.
Yeah.
That showed up late in the season. And I think also because of that, for as much as I absolutely believe he was their best perimeter defender, I think that's actually one area, and Izzo talked about it a lot. He kept saying, there's another gear to get to for him being an absolute bulldog of a defender, right? He never quite was that this year. I'm not putting any blame on him for that. Realistically, I don't think he had the energy to spare.
Exactly. Yeah.
To do that. The hope is that maybe next year we could see more of what we occasionally saw from him 2 years ago in that regard.
Right.
That
right.
He'll have less on his plate, because he will. But he had you can nitpick certain things, but he had a fantastic season. He had the best, I think, pretty easily, the best individual season anybody's had at Michigan State since Cassius left. Jace Richardson had a great year last year, but it wasn't asked to do all the things that Jeremy was.
And statistically, it wasn't the same either. And then we'd be remiss not to mention that Minnesota game. Not only did Divine Ugochukwu go down, but that was the flagrant foul, and that was sort of the big controversy with Jeremy Fears and the foul baiting and stuff, and and the dirty plays or whatever it might be. But I think
hold up a sec. But you've got to actually, that's true. But the story really is the game before that,
right? The Michigan game,
and it's Dusty May in his press conference.
You're right. Yeah,
that's what sort of started it. Set it up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important to point out that Dusty May was complaining about some calls that weren't made, that some he just were dangerous plays or whatever, like trips and things like that. And Jeremy's always played on the edge. He's baits fouls. It's sort of one of the reasons it's kind of annoying watching basketball sometimes. The guy's flailing their head back all the time. Jeremy does it not as much as some other players. He sort of initiates more contact, and so he just tends to be a more rough and tumble kind of player. But what's impressive about that, I think, is that there was definitely maturity issues, and yes, he struggled with those calls, and he would emotionally, I think he'd get too wrapped up in the game, or just let it sort of get overcome with that, with his emotions, and not make wise decisions on the court, gesturing to the scoreboard or whatever it might be in situations where, the camera's on him, there's a focus on him. And so he figured that out. And so I think from a maturity, so he grew from that. And I don't think it'll be a problem next year. I think, you just got to know where the line is and know how to stay on the right side of it. And I think he learned that. And I think that's an important thing, because it's, he was a sophomore, and he's still fairly young in his career. And especially nowadays too, the harder thing is that every sort of thing is seen on camera. Like, you cannot not have things shown on camera now. So you just have to be smarter about that, because it's, you're not playing, and that also goes for players coming from other leagues, right? Who are not used to, if you're playing the SWAC or something, you could do a lot of stuff and no one would ever know, because there's like one camera on the game, and now things are a lot different. So anyway, I think that was an important part from a growth standpoint for Jeremy too, which helped in his leadership and going forward.
The thing that doesn't get discussed as part of this, and it's not an excuse, but it's descriptively what happens. If you look at all of those moments, typically what you saw was Jeremy on the receiving end of physical play by an opponent, and it happening as a reaction.
Yeah, exaggeration of what happened.
With the play with in the Minnesota game, for example, if I recall correctly, the initial call was a foul on Minnesota's guard.
Yeah, he got pushed from behind. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, again, that doesn't excuse it. You have to be in control of your emotions, not retaliate. That's what the foul call is for. But let's not pretend as if, well, Jeremy's just going out headhunting.
Right.
They at the Michigan game, I'm going to tell you, Elliot Cadeau was a punk. Absolute punk. Izzo in his way, made references to that. If you watch the game, it was going both ways. Both ways.
Sure.
Again, not an excuse, because you're right. The stuff gets caught, and now there's a focus on him. So he's really not going to get away with anything,
Yep.
And we saw that. We saw that the Illinois game, which happened right in that stretch. Illinois asked for a review of a play. Jeremy ended up not getting called for the flagrant, but I mean, it was the blood was in the water,
Right. Yeah.
And so he's got to be cognizant of that. I agree with you that it seemed like there was a maturation, but things start over again next November, and that's got to continue. It is something that he's got to be conscious of. If for no other reason than this, not just that he's a critically important player for Michigan State, but for himself. Jeremy Fears is set up, I think, to have a truly spectacular season at Michigan State, which might be his last. That'll be his fourth year. He would have one additional year of eligibility, but I don't know that anybody's convinced that will actually happen. The smart move would be to approach next year as if it's his last. It's set up, we're talking about this. He's going to be in the discussion for National Player of the Year. There's no doubt about that. You don't want anything that's going to take away from that. Now, you still got to be the same guy you are. That's the flip side to it.
Exactly.
You can't coach what he is in terms of his emotion, his energy, his toughness, all of those things. You can't take that away. So it's a line you got to walk. But I also think we know where that line is, and he knows where that line is. So you hope for continued progression on that front. Again, first and foremost, because I think it will do him a disservice if he's not careful about that.
Yeah. So next we come to Coen Carr, who had we'll just say a good year. He finished with 12 points a game, shot 52, 28, and 63, 5.4 rebounds a game. 1.5 of those were offensive. Assist to turnover ratio was less than 1-to-1. He averaged 1.2 assists to 1.4 turnovers a game. Had about a half a steal a game, 0.8 blocks a game. And Coen it'll be, I think, the how far Michigan State goes next year is going to be dependent in large part, or at least a decent part, on how Coen comes out and from a consistency standpoint, because the problem that he had last year, which is where he was not consistent throughout the game, and then you see what he can do in the NCAA tournament, and you're like, boy, if he does that next year. Of course, he didn't. He did it at times, and sometimes he would be dominant for a half or for a 8-minute stretch or something like that. And I think that is the thing. I know people get hung up on his 3-point shooting, which is a little sub 30%. The shot looks good, and I suspect he'll be better next year. He'll have better percentage. But the things that he really didn't come with that we'd hoped with is from the rebounding standpoint. He wasn't that. What we know he can do, he wasn't doing as much with the rebounding. Also, his free throw shooting was worse than last year. I mean, 62%. I think he ended last year in the 70, like 70%.
Yeah, he went backward a little bit.
Yeah, he went, and he was pretty bad early, and he kind of worked it back up to 63. But there's just so much more there to unlock, obviously, and also from a ball handling standpoint is probably not what you hope for either. He still has to work on that, because if you look projecting him going to the next level, he's what, 6'6", 6'7",
6'6",
6'6". It's hard to envision a guy who you've got to either be a really good shooter, lockdown defender, or have a really good handle, or probably all three of those things in order to have a successful next level. All things I think he's not too far away from. Maybe you could say ball handling's not quite there, but the defense has definitely been improving at sort of the end of the year. I don't know. I mean, Coen has always been intriguing because there's so much athleticism there that you just kind of you can envision all sorts of things being possible for the kid. And, he's almost like he has to work on everything at once. And so, he had a good season, but probably not what we had hoped he was going to have for Michigan State to make that next jump.
Yeah, well, a lot of enthusiasm came out of the way he played in the NCAA tournament run last year, rightly so. And we're in deja vu all over again territory this year because he once again had a very good NCAA tournament. And so it sets you up in a way where you're thinking, okay, be that guy consistently, and then you've really got something. It's interesting. In some ways, I think there'll be less on him than there was this year.
Yeah, probably.
Because they're going to have more offensive options. The offense is not going to need as much, I don't think. Doesn't mean they won't want to get as much or more, but I'm just saying there's more depth, and there's more reason to think that other guys will be able to step up.
Exactly.
But the flip side of it is, in some ways, he's as or more important next year if you want to break through and become a true national title favorite.
Right.
You touched on the two areas. I think it's defense and rebounding, because in both areas you can say he's good as it is and have that be true. He is. But Coen Carr has the potential to be special. Since he got here, I know I've talked about this, and I'm not alone. The comparison point to me has always been there in a very general way with somebody like Brandon Dawson. And Coen already does certain things better than Brandon. He's a better shooter than Brandon ever was, which tells you where Brandon was as a shooter, but he is.
Yeah.
And he's obviously, for as great an athlete as Brandon was, Cohen's better.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But Brandon Dawson, from the day he got to Michigan State, was a consistent high level defender and rebounder. It wasn't one game he's there, the next game he's not at the same level, and then he's back. None of that. Consistent. The Louisville game was one, and Cohen's had a few others like this over his career. There are a handful of times where his play has reminded me of Brandon Dawson, in that you could see him making plays, and I'm not talking about dunks or three-pointers. I mean primarily defensive plays or rebounds. You could see him making plays that nobody else on that court was going to be able to make.
Right.
And that's what Brandon Dawson used to be able to do in high-level games. That's what he brought pretty consistently during his time at Michigan State. If Coen Carr can do that, if he could bottle up that stretch he had in the Louisville game where they took control and it was largely on his back that they did so, at both ends, if they get that guy consistently, then it does raise the ceiling of this team. And that's what Coen needs to be. I've described it for the 3 years he's been here thus far. When Coen plays like his hair is on fire, Michigan State has a weapon, flat out.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that consistently enough. And I don't think it's I don't think it's he's lazy. None of that. It's just like you always hear Michigan State players talk about their wake-up call early on when they get to Michigan State, where they discover that they thought they knew what playing hard was, and they find out they didn't. Coen, my assumption is it's a mental thing. It's a focus thing.
Yeah.
More than anything else, of figuring out, how do I tap into that level of energy 100% of the time, or something much closer to it than what we've seen. That's where I think that we're talking about differences at the margins,
Yeah.
but those are margins that are there to be won by him, and as a flowing from that, his team. Lots of potential. We all know that. We all been talking about that since he's been here. And there were signs of growth. The jumper, you can talk about it being sub 30%, but let me take a quick look here to see if
certainly looks good. Yeah, I don't know what the
Coen Carr. Well, it's funny because actually his Big Ten 3-point shooting was slightly worse than his overall. It was 27%. But I think there was a stretch down the back half of Big Ten play where it was better.
Yeah.
I think he did make strides there, even though the percentages don't tell a story of a massive uptick. I do think he made strides. And I do think getting to the plus side of 30 is realistic for him next year. Free throw shooting absolutely can be better than it was. And I think it will be. I think he did show more varied ability to score. He did show more off the dribble stuff than we'd seen before. Does he need to continue to get better? Absolutely. Not a finished product or even close. But to me, when you talk about where he can be even more of a difference maker than he was this year, it starts with him as a defender and a rebounder consistently being that guy we saw against Louisville and the other tournament games as well, but especially Louisville.
Yeah. I mean, 5.5 and 1.5 for rebounds. I mean, I think you could see him definitely getting to 7 and 2 next year. I mean, of course, you're always fighting other people, but like 2 offensive rebounds a year, those are putbacks, and there's obviously more there than luck. And I feel like sometimes I think he's a little deferential, and that's probably part of it.
Yeah.
Just
he's
like,
he's an extremely, it's gotten a little bit of play here late in the season. the bit him at the press conference with going back and putting
Fixing
the chairs, which is
the Jace did the year
a
before.
simple thing.
Yeah.
And people can mock that if they want, but they're wrong, because that kind of thing does tell you, it's a little small, tiny thing, but it tells you something about someone's mentality. That doesn't mean he's perfect every minute of every day, but it tells you something about who he is. He's every sense I have of him is that he's a really good kid. Tom Izzo clearly loves him. And so the mentality is one where it's not crazy to think about, well, some of this might be him deferring, as opposed to just, which we don't see. There aren't a lot of times where we see him go out there and it's obvious, hey, he's decided he's taking over.
Yeah, right.
We did see it in that stretch where they won the game essentially against Louisville. That's right. What I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's that guy more often makes Michigan State an even better team. No doubt about it.
Well, another guy who makes Michigan State a better team is certainly Jordan Scott, freshman. He finished with 5.8 points a game, shot 41, 37, and 70. And even more impressive, that 37 after him starting, what was he, like 2 for 16 or something to start the season from 3? So to get, he had 3-point rebounds a game, 1.3 of those were offensive. He had 1.2 assists per game to 0.9 turnovers a game, averaged 0.7 steals a game, and half a block a game. And this is a guy who, I think he played every game, I believe, but certainly later in the year, obviously his importance was magnified. He was obviously starting, and you started seeing a little bit more of, I don't want to say the warts, but I think just sort of the limitations of what he could and couldn't do, especially from a defensive standpoint. But I think you saw what we expected was a really good shooter, and he was that. I mean, he for as bad as his start was to his college career, he really picked up at the end, and there's every reason to think he's going to be even more so, especially the fact that he's so long. To have him as a 2 or probably more like a 3, like he sort of started the season, which is kind of where you expect him to slot in a little bit more next year.
In the league, he shot 44% from 3.
Yeah.
27 for 62. So that means he averaged 3 attempts per game. That's a healthy volume. So that's a real number. That's the guy that was talked about when he was recruited. That was the strength, right? Was really good shooter, a lot of offensive potential. It's a funny one to talk about, because you're right. Jordan down the stretch did not play as well as he had been. And so I think there is some lingering sense of maybe a little bit of dissatisfaction with the way his season ended. But the reason that's the case is because he so outperformed expectations for the first 2/3 of the season.
Yeah.
The legitimate discussion point with him was, can he be strong enough to help right away? Well, he was. And that doesn't mean it was perfect. There were issues that showed up in terms of his strength. There were individual matchups where part of the reason he struggled defensively is that he just got out-muscled by, a 24-year-old who was just a lot stronger physically than he was. We saw it in the Minnesota game, actually. Big part of the reason for that loss, I think, was that Jordan was really struggling against Reynolds, who is a bigger, physical, not taller, but bigger, stronger, physically mature player. And he took him down low and gave him the business. And Jordan physically couldn't do much about it. But that said, he clearly was strong enough to be a major part of this team, which was a pleasant upside surprise. I think the other thing that wasn't fully appreciated about him, but we know now, is that kind of the contrast to what we were just talking about with Coen, where we don't see that hair on fire from him often enough. You see that all the time from Jordan Scott. You are never getting shortchanged on energy. And because of that, because of his mentality and his physical tools, 6'8", with great length. I'm not sure where his wingspan is, but I'm going to guess it's plus. For sure,
plus,
it's
for
plus.
sure. Yeah, right.
And it might even, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody said it's 6'11", 7 feet. Wouldn't surprise me. He just makes plays because of the way he approaches the game. He makes plays on the boards where you don't see it coming, and he comes from out of the picture and gets a range rebound. You know, there's so many little things that deflections, so many little things that he does that add up positively. I am so bullish on his future. The way his season ended, which was not a disaster, but it was just, he looked like a freshman more often. You know, and I do think he rose up the scouting report a little bit, so there was more attention paid to him, and teams took advantage of his inexperience. They took advantage of some of his physical weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
That all was true, but man, I am so bullish on his potential. I actually don't think you're going to you'll see him some at the 3, but I still think you're talking about him as a 2. And I think that one of the most interesting things with Michigan State going into next season is what happens at that 2, because you have their top recruit in Josiah Jervis, who is a complete two-way guard, can do everything, including handle the ball. On the surface, he addresses every issue you had at that position. But you've also got a Jordan Scott who's now got a year under his belt, did a ton of good things, and absolutely is going, if I know one thing, it's that he is going to compete his ass off.
Right.
I don't know yet how that goes. They're both going to play, but that is going to be a fascinating battle of sorts to watch, in my opinion, is between those two guys for that role.
Yeah. I think the assumptions that, you know, Scott's not going to start, that Jervis can start over him. I think, you know,
I'm not convinced of that.
Right? I'm the same way.
I think it's possible. Absolutely. And I'm kind of in for the nothing it means as we're sitting here talking in April. Right now, I would be in coin flip territory. And that's no knock on Josiah Jervis. I expect him to be an unusual freshman. I think he's going to be ready to go. It's more of a compliment to what I think Jordan Scott is.
Yeah.
So that position, in my opinion, is going to go from one that people harped on all year as a weakness to a serious strength. That's my prediction. And Jordan Scott's a big part of the reason why.
Right. And, you know, one of the players who is going to certainly, you know, be a strength next year, who was, but it's a big change from this year. It's at the 4. You're going to go from Jaxon Kohler now, probably Cam Ward. Cam had a pretty good freshman year. I mean, more than I think we thought. I think, you know, we were unsure sort of how much we'd see of any of these freshmen, and we saw more, I think, than both of them, and more integral than I think we had anticipated. Certainly more Scott than Ward, because Ward seemed like this more obvious role for him in minutes, but
I expected him to be a firm part of the rotation. That was not a surprise.
Yeah. But he finished with 5.1 points a game. He shot 59, 0, and 50, 4.2 rebounds a game. 1.3 of those were offensive, had 0.3 assists per game to 0.8 turnovers per game, had 0.4 steals per game, and half a block a game. Obviously, really struggled at the free throw line. That was his kryptonite. But 60% from the field, really good. So he kind of knew who he was. He didn't attempt much for 3, and I don't see that as his future for a couple years, probably. Certainly not next year, I wouldn't expect. But you're going to see a lot more minutes of him, obviously. Defensively, he's very versatile. He's not a whole lot bigger than Scott from a height standpoint. What is he, like 6'9" versus 6'8"? But he plays big, and he definitely has more strength, you know, coming into college. And so he was ready physically for the Big Ten, which was impressive.
Yes.
This, if defensively, if there's anything you'd say about him, I feel a number of times he just looked like a freshman, like he got fooled by things, and but that's totally to be anticipated. And so I, expect a lot different Cam Ward and even more effective next year, I think.
He's a critical piece to this team. And I say that for many reasons, but one of the most important is right now, we know Michigan State almost certainly is going to add somebody in the portal. We don't know who that's going to be. But right now, as it stands, and we don't know, for example, Julius Avant, we don't know a lot about what to expect from him as a freshman.
Exactly.
But right now, Michigan State's post group has one guy that I think has a legitimate chance to be a plus defensive player, and that's Cam Ward.
Mm-hmm.
So that alone makes him really important. Look, Izzo trusted him. It's why he played so much and Jesse McCulloch didn't. He trusted Cam defensively. Now, was he perfect? No. You pointed it out. I think the issues were primarily ones born of inexperience rather than, he doesn't have the physical tools. He's got the physical tools. But I think we're going to see rapid growth from Cameron Ward. I really do. He got right out of the chute, game 2. He was massive in the win over Arkansas, right? What do you have? 18 and 10. It was double-double. Yeah. And that started people wondering, oh my God, is Cam Ward somebody that we've actually overlooked? And then not long after that, he was continuing to play well, played well in the win over North Carolina too, but we came to find out hurt his wrist. He missed a few games, came back. I don't think he was ever right fully offensively. I'm not excusing the free throw shooting, but I'm going to say, in my opinion, some of it came down to that. Keep in mind, as a high school player, he was responsible for a lot more than what you saw at Michigan State this season. Right. And I don't mean that he was out there tossing up 5 threes a game, but I am not convinced that much more in the way of ball skills is not in there. I think it is.
Yeah, and we saw it a couple of late in the season. Like I think we saw a couple times.
Yeah, I think assuming health, we're going to see more. I don't mean he's going to go out there jacking up threes. I just mean I think you're going to see better free throw shooting. I think you are going to see a more varied offensive game from him.
Yep.
His high school team used him as a facilitator on offense. I think Cam is going to be that guy. If you watch Michigan State play, bigs or one big on this team, it was Carson Cooper, get used a lot in half court sets.
Right.
Handling the ball, right? A lot of top of the key action. Dribble handoffs, a lot of different things they do. I suspect that maybe it depends in part on who they add too, but I think you're going to see Cam Ward doing a lot more of that. And I think he'll be good at it in time. Yeah. I really do. But the big things for him are defense. He's got to be the guy I think he can be, which means a plus defender who can guard on the blocks and out in space, both. And then I think you're going to see him become a high-level rebounder. And I think he's also a guy who's going to emerge as the best low post scorer they've had in a while. And I say that because, again, when healthy, what he showed you was an athletic burst and explosion that they haven't had from anybody at that spot in a while.
Yeah.
Cam physically can do some things around the rim to finish plays that Michigan State hasn't had as much of lately. I think that's going to be part of the difference. And I love his mentality. I mean, he goes out there wanting to kick people's ass. That's what you want.
Yeah, for
what
sure.
You need. So yeah. I'm very bullish on Cam Ward too. I think we just started to scratch the surface.
I agree. And I think, going to the dribble handoff, with Carson, the one thing Carson wouldn't do, or maybe he did like once or twice, is attack from there off the dribble.
Yep. I think that's something you'll see more
That's something you're going to
as
see
time
from him
goes on from Cam.
now.
Yep.
Now,
Absolutely.
and the thing you didn't see from when Jaxon didn't do it a whole lot, but they did sometimes, and that he just stays there, and for an opportunity to shoot a three, obviously that will not be Cam's game next year. I don't think. Maybe at the end of the season.
No.
You could see it maybe third year, fourth year sort of thing.
That stuff's going to
be my
come
expectation.
Development over time. But I'm just, I don't want to leave people thinking that I believe, Cam's going to be a complete offensive player next year. No, but I think there's much more in there than you saw this year. And I think we're going to see more of it.
Yeah. And he's definitely he's a drive and dish guy too, right? Like he'll attack. And if they try and double, someone comes off him, he'll throw into the corner for someone to shoot a three, and presumably there'll be a lot of shooters at the team next year. So anyway, it should be exciting to see what happens next year. All right, so now we're brought to you by the should be Nudge Printing. Is players a questionable return. So these are players we don't think are leaving, but that there's sort of like been rumblings, I guess, potential departures, and so it's a way to sort of separate the show. We'll begin Divine Ugochukwu. He's had 5.1 points a game, shot 51, 44, 56, 1.5 rebounds a game, 0.2 those were offensive. He had 1.5 assists per game to 0.7 turnovers a game, so a 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio. Averaged about 0.4 steals a game. Had, I think, a couple blocks, so 0.1 blocks. He obviously got injured in the Minnesota game, just running down the floor, which is, you see those injuries happen from time to time. It has nothing to do with training. It just sort of thing that just happens, which no one likes to accept the fact that you have problems, just like a fracture or something like that happens. But these are high-level athletes doing high-level things. So he had we've touched on a number of times the show already today, sort of a really kind of weird course of the year. He came in as a backup point guard, a guy who had historically, at least in his freshman year at Miami, shot 17% from three. So he was not expected to be a shooter. Suddenly he's really good from outside. He's, like I said, he's finished season 44%. He definitely won the game in Penn State. And then he lost this sort of position as far as the starter or the backup point guard, where it went to Denham Wojcik because of communication issues. I think he's just kind of a quiet kid. That was sort of, when we interviewed him, that sort of seemed like his personality. And so anyway, then he kind of arcs back into the backup point guards. And then, as you mentioned, he got injured that game. So we really never knew what happened afterwards. But from a physical standpoint, 6'3", 6'4", but really long wingspan. It's got to be like 6'6" or 6'7" or something like that. He's got really long arms. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Trey as far as his plus length, which made him tricky defensively for players to attack. So anyway, he's had I think a really good year. And I'm not sure that you would have expected more. I mean, obviously, if he'd stayed healthy, you would have seen something differently, but pretty successful year for him. I mean, on his standpoint, I imagine, because even if he were to depart, he's definitely worth more in the market, so to speak, than he would have been coming in.
For as much as Trey Fort's season disappointed in terms of the portal guys, Divine was to the upside.
Right.
The fact that he shot the way he did was completely unexpected. We talked about it coming into the season. His high school numbers did not tell the story of a guy who was Eric Snow as a freshman. Sometimes it happens that going up that level from high school to college, especially to the high major level, guys struggle shooting the ball as freshmen. You can go look at the stats for anybody, and it's going to tell you that story often. So I never worried that, he can't shoot at all. But the idea that he would shoot the way he did, no, that was a surprise. I think there was reason to be optimistic about him defensively based on what he did at Miami, and I think that was borne out to largely be true. Was he a lockdown defender? No, but he was by far, it was Jeremy and then him and then a big gap.
Right.
In terms of perimeter defense. Now, some of that is damning with Michigan State's whole group, but some of it is also that Devine is pretty good there. And I do think, Tom Izzo may not be convinced of it, but I do think he shows potential to at least be an adequate option as part of a group effort in terms of ball handling. Not a great creator, not your ideal guy to play 30 minutes a night there, but part of a solution. Yeah, I think so. So he was really good. Look, when I look at their situation, Devine's probably, in my opinion, assuming health, probably is looking at being a third string guy, whether that's on or off the ball or both. So in that situation, would I understand a transfer? I would.
Right.
I hope he doesn't, because I think he could continue to get better. But I don't know how big the role is for him next year at MSU. I really don't.
Yeah, when it comes to these two players and whether they stick around or leave, nowadays, I mean, I guess it comes down to sort of how much they believe themselves and the competition and what is coming, because
and compensation, and there's a lot of
compensation
things.
too.
But I think
sure,
if Devine went in the portal, my expectation would be another high major would be interested. At the very least, he'd be looking at opportunities where he would be in a similar kind of role to the one he was in with Michigan State this year when healthy. And he might very well be able to find opportunities where he'd have a chance to compete as a starter. I mean, I guess he did start at Michigan State some, so it's enough to just say similar to the role he had at Michigan State this year. I do think that absolutely would be in the cards. I don't know where he's at, where Michigan State's at, what they've talked about. All we know is that Tom Izzo has said to date, and I've had this, other people who would know have confirmed it more recently than when Izzo said it. As of right now, there's been no indication that anyone's leaving. That can change. I kind of, in my heart of heart, expect it to change, but it hasn't happened yet. This would be the guy out of everybody who is most obvious to me to be a candidate for that. But that's just my opinion.
Right. Well, and again, much like the Denham situation before, there's a lot of information we don't have. We just make assumptions based on, what's being said or what we can see, which right now is not a whole lot. So, all right, before we talk about our next player, Kur Teng, just want to remind you that Nudge Printing is a great place to go to get any sort of Spartan apparel. It is, of course, new season. I'm wearing my hoodie because it's still kind of like cold-ish, but it's starting to get better, I think, outside, although it's a little wet. But make sure you head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. Don't forget, you get 20% off all the great products just simply by typing in TIFFNUTS, as TFFINOTS, at checkout. Head over to nudgeprinting.com/win if you want to get something cool like the TIFFNUTS stuff I'm wearing. Also, you can enter our drawings, which we don't have one right now. Also, I'll announce the winners for the bracket picks next show. Although I can just mention that Bracket Dom won. So quite the performance from Bracket Dom, who says he just usually does not do that great. So anyway, let's talk about Kur Teng, who's also, because of this, just the crowded nature of the 2-3 spot, I guess, in Michigan State next year with the incoming freshman. There's a lot of discussion of whether, if there's room minutes, those sorts of things. And so it's not unreasonable to imagine that they might see a departure here, there. And that's why we talk about Devine. Kur's obviously one has also been talked about as well, because he's shown he's a very good shooter, 7.3 points a game this season, shot 38, 38, and 81, 2 rebounds a game and half of those, half of an offensive rebound a game. He had 1 assist a game to 0.8 turnovers a game, 0.3 steals, 0.1 blocks per game. Kur, certainly near the end of the season, from a defensive standpoint, it got a lot better. He really struggled early in the year, and even later in the Big Ten season, still would have times when he sort of struggled. Again, sort of like Trey Fort, seemed to get better at the very, very tail end of the season, just with a little bit more time or experience under his belt, I suppose, more time in practice. So it'll be interesting to see what happens at that position, because again, he's a guy you don't imagine starting, but he could be a valuable shooter off the bench, someone who can score. And if his defense gets better, you can imagine a scenario where you play him at the 3 or the 2 and you have someone else there. I mean, you could you have a small lineup with a lot of guys who can score if you have the defense can match. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be, again, very interesting to see how things progress next year, but also for those same reasons there, you can imagine him also not be coming back because it's just too clogged as far as trying to get minutes and opportunities.
Well, in one sense, he's in a worse position than Divine in that he's only really a one position player.
Right.
We've
He's
seen
not a
Divine
ball
play
handler,
on and
yeah.
off the ball. And Kur is only an off the ball guy. However, if I had to handicap it, and it's worth nothing because I'm just talking about specifically how I see what they do on the court, their strengths, weaknesses, their roles. It is easier for me to see Kur remaining on the team because he does do that one thing very, very well. And I know Divine shot the ball well last year, but I don't think anybody would be coming into this season necessarily expecting, hey, that's your 3-point sniper off the bench.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Whereas with Kur, that absolutely is his role. In a year that was very inconsistent, he still shot, what he shoot, 38%, I think?
38 from the field and from the three. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's there, right? And you know that he can do it when guarded. You know he can do it under any situation.
More when guarded.
Yeah. He's even better. So it'll be very interesting to see what decision he makes. I could understand him deciding that, you know what, there's an opportunity for me to have more minutes and a bigger role somewhere else. I would get that. But I also think if he returns, particularly if he's the only one of those two guys to return, I do think there would be some minutes for him. And with the potential for him to grow his role depending upon how he played. You know, there were times last year where he showed the potential to at least be functional defensively, but it didn't consistently happen.
Right.
So I can tell you this, when they recruited him, they thought he had the potential to actually be a good defensive player. Now, he was never a great athlete, but they thought he had that potential. They thought physically he was ready to go for the Big Ten level. They liked his understanding. I think I think this has been a negative surprise that he has struggled as much as he has defensively. I think they thought he would be better earlier. But there's still the opportunity for that development to happen. I will not be disappointed in the slightest if Kur's back. I hope he's back because I do think he's got some things to give for this team. But again, as with Divine, you could understand it.
Yeah, I think with Kur, it is not for him. It just seems like it's an awareness issue. Like when it comes to defense, like just seeing the pick coming, or and just maybe the decisions like go under screen or over screen. They're little things, and I think they're things that are correctable. That I don't think he just like a Wojcik where he just physically just can't do it. It's more a film study sort of thing for him, and I mean, I think there's every reason to think that he could be what they thought he would be. Because again, I think from a physical standpoint, he definitely has like the wingspan. I think he's got the size and he's quick enough to hang with most people. I mean, and I think the fact that he's pulling down 2 rebounds a game shows too that he can get in and we saw that even when he was a freshman that, you know, from a physical standpoint, he can hang with people and do some things. And from an effort standpoint, he can get some stuff done as well. It's just a matter of just kind of knowing where he's supposed to be, which I think is a tricky thing sometimes.
Yeah. Look, I think that of the 3 guys that I think are most likely to leave would be in that category, Jesse's the one I want back the most.
Right.
And the reason I say that is he has offensive talent we've seen it against high-level opponents. It's not a guess. That they haven't had a lot of in recent years. You definitely got to go back to Jaren Jackson, but I would argue Jesse reminds me more than Jaren. He reminds me more of somebody like Adrian Payne, because like AP, he's got a little more varied offensive game at this point. Like you've seen him in the mid-range. We've seen him hit hooks.
Yep.
And then, of course, he shoots the three well in limited volume, but still. He's a talented kid offensively, but there's a reason his playing time shrunk as the year went on. And it was a surprise to me. I know they really liked his potential defensively, mostly because of his understanding and that he talks. I saw him do that in AAU games. You don't often see that. Guys on the back line of a defense talking, communicating. Michigan State puts a huge emphasis on that, and Jesse had shown that. Right. So I was very optimistic coming into this year that he was going to play a regular rotation role. Instead, what happened is his role shrunk, and Cam really became the only backup. Some of it was that Carson and Jaxon played so well and so consistently too.
Yeah.
That was also a factor.
Sure.
But I was surprised that Jesse didn't play more. Now, does he have strides to make defensively? Absolutely. I happen to think, and this is just my observation, I thought the biggest problem was rebounding. I didn't think he didn't show quite the compete level that I think you need to. So that's something to work on. But look, I think that the necessary strides that need to be made with him in those areas of weakness are possible. And the offensive capability is such that I really, really want to see him stick around.
Yeah.
I think if Michigan State adds a player at the 5 who is reliable defensively, Jesse is in perfect position to play a significant role as a backup there. Might even play a little bit at the 4 too, but I would guess more at the 5.
Right.
Because he gives you some things. If you're in a game where, you just feel like you need a little more stretch on the floor. Well, Jesse McCulloch can give that to you.
Yep.
So I think he's very definitely got a role to play at Michigan State that would be significant, would matter, and hopefully would be enough to satisfy him. The last part, I don't have any clue. All 3 of these guys we've mentioned, there's been a little bit of rumbling, nothing close to definitive as to which way they're leaning.
Yeah.
You can imagine and almost certainly be correct that offers are flowing in for all these guys. For some of the guys we've talked about previously too, all of them.
Sure. Yeah.
As a matter of fact. But with these 3 in particular, I would imagine it's a somewhat fluid situation in that regard, because until you're in it, you don't really, because Michigan State does a pretty good job, I think, of shutting shit down during the season, probably better than anybody else. You hear about, I mentioned this on the Spartan Mag board the other day. I was told in a conversation I had a couple days ago that Greg Gard was driven absolutely batty by what was going on with John Blackwell all year long. So this isn't just people reaching out to an agent saying, hey, we're interested in him coming over next year. This is concrete offers. It's tampering with a capital T.
Yeah.
I think Michigan State does. I'm not saying they cut all of it off, but I think they do as much as any program can to limit that, but during the season. But now at this point, for sure, all 3 of these guys are getting more information as to what opportunities might be available to them. So we just don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like McCulloch's situation is there's just more speculation. And if it's a guy who's playing 8-10 minutes a game last year, I don't think there would be much discussion about him exiting, but the fact that he had a lot of DMPs and
That's part of it. Yeah, that's part
yeah,
of
I
it.
think that was probably a large part of probably, people speculate, well, he might be questioning, should he be here or not? Because he hardly got on the floor. And
Right.
you see not many options for Michigan State at the 5 next year, because you're going to have Brandon Taylor, but then, I mean, hard to envision him playing more than 20 minutes. Even that much seems like a lot, but McCulloch, he only averaged 2.4 points a game. He shot 48, 50, and 93. He had 1.3 rebounds a game, 0.5 offensive boards a game, and 1.2 to 0.3 assists and turnovers a game, a steal, and half a block a game. So he 50% from 3, again, limited volume in some respects because he wasn't on the floor much, but definitely shows those offensive attributes. And yeah, you can definitely see him play the 4, although again, it seems like it's gonna be a real crowded roster in some positions, and that's in the 4 and the 3 and the 2 seem really crowded. It's the 5 that just is the one that you can see having him there as a stretch. I mean, when's the last time Michigan State had a 5 who was it Adrian Payne, the last 5 they had who really would stretch the floor?
No, Jaren Jackson.
I never thought of him playing the 5. I was playing with the 4.
He started at the 4. You're correct, but there were times he played at the 5. But full time, yeah, Adrian Payne.
Yeah, and that was at the end of his career, not at the beginning.
Right.
I mean, I think
right.
So, all right. So then, in wrapping up, I think at this point, as you just mentioned, we don't really have a whole lot of news as far as people coming in at this point. I think there's been some discussion as far as it looks like. I mean, if Izzo's correct, and maybe he is that this is sort of the roster, and then there's going to be one addition, and that's probably all you can envision. I mean, from a scholarship standpoint, I think that's all you can really even add, right? I mean, I don't even think they could even add to if they wanted to at this point. So we don't know anyone leaving, but it's possible that we publish it and then like an hour later there's an announcement. But as it always is the case with the portal. I mean, what are you hearing, or are you hearing anything? I guess in either additions or deletions to the team.
Not a lot of concrete stuff out there right now, as is usually the case. Michigan State does a pretty good job of keeping things to themselves in terms of keeping their own counsel in terms of what they're likely to do. Now, eventually information gets out, all these kids have agents, and when a Michigan State makes contact with a player, that's big news. It does nothing but help the kid's financial situation, right?
Right.
To know Michigan State, if nothing else. So that much is we know about. I can just tell you this, and I went into this some on the Spartan Mag board the other day, and I'll repeat it here for those of you who haven't seen it. Tom Izzo has a lot of Judd in him still. This is by the way, this is my 2 cents. This is my take based on what I've observed over the years, what I've been told, all of that. So take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's at least directionally accurate. It's got a lot of Judd in him. What do I mean by that? Judd Heathcote was a tremendous evaluator of talent and a tremendous strategic mind. But he was known to be incredibly critical of players. There are, and this is true of things in life too, right? It's not just sports, where you can be a person who looks at what the positives and the negatives are, and you say, well, I like the positives, I'll just work on making the negatives better. And then there are people for whom the negatives tend to outweigh the positives. I think as a talent evaluator, my impression is, and particularly when we're talking about the portal, which is something that he doesn't like to begin with. Tom Izzo falls into the latter category. What I have been told is that, and this was a person who was talking about various names, so specific names. I can't identify who those are except for one player for sure, possibly 2. But what I was told is that he'll find the flaws in anybody.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's what's going on. And I know this much. I know that the standard at Michigan State, even for high school kids, has been one of the bigger jobs an MSU assistant has is to convince Izzo why they should recruit a certain kid. That tells a story, right?
Yeah.
That Tom Izzo is focused on the things that someone can do. He's even admitted it from time to time. He says, I tend to focus more as kind of almost in a lamenting way that I'm not appreciating as much about what people can do as much as denigrating them for what they can't.
Yeah.
But that's part of the reason why he's been so successful. It's a big part of the reason why, in my opinion. Because there's no slippage. There's no let up. There's no, I say slippage, I mean in the standard, you know? And so that's what's going on. It is very difficult to find guys who are plug and play in terms of what Michigan State demands defensively at the 5. And it all starts defensively. Part of that is because it's a rare thing, relatively speaking, to find tall players, tall people who can also move well,
right,
and who have an understanding conceptually of what it means to be able to play in a defense the way Michigan State chooses to play it, right? There are not a lot of teams that play that 5s are asked to do the things that Michigan State demands of their 5s defensively. So there's not a lot of guys out there that you could just drop in and say, well, that's a perfect fit. There's a reason why you tend to see the Carson Cooper trajectory in a general sense is not unusual at Michigan State. It tends to take some time, even with guys who have the physical tools. The really, really rare occasions, very rarely, I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. I can think of 3 guys who came in and at least in a lot of ways, were ready to go as freshmen in terms of what Michigan State asks their bigs to do defensively. Antonio Smith, Draymond Green, Xavier Tillman.
Yeah.
And the latter 2, I would argue, were not even quite there yet as freshmen. They were just much more advanced than a freshman typically is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's kind of where it ends. Right? So maybe a healthy Delvon Rowe would have been that, but we never got to find out. So it's hard, man. It's hard. And they're going to add somebody. I'm convinced. I do not think it's going to be Jesse McCulloch, Ethan Taylor, and that's it. Right. I think they're going to add somebody. Who that is, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. My understanding was, as of night before last, they were still evaluating a lot of players. They were still looking at a bigger group than has been reported. Where that lands, nobody has got good intel on. There's a kid, Trayson Anderson, who was the starting 5 for North Dakota State.
Right.
That is real, at least in the sense that there have been real discussions about him. There have been discussions between him, his agent, and Michigan State. I am not under the impression that that is anywhere close to happening. It's just a name.
Yeah.
You have seen a lot of speculation about Aiden Sherrell. Aiden Sherrell was a starter at Alabama last year as a sophomore. Put up some solid numbers. He's from Detroit. Michigan State recruited him coming out of high school.
Right, right.
He has been linked with Michigan State already in this process. I did not hear anything the other night that convinced me that that is in the likely category. I'm not ruling it out, but I haven't heard anything that made me think that's their guy. That's what they're doing. They're going to, and, you know, you're already hearing, Jesus, he's talking Indiana, Duke, North Carolina. I mean, there's some big names that are supposedly confirmed as having made contact and are in discussion with him. So because big men demand the most money of anybody, they're the most in demand because of the rarest commodity. Anybody who's been a starter at the high major level is going to demand a certain attention, right?
Yeah.
Now, I happen to think, and this is my opinion, I don't know that I believe he's, if you're going to go spend, I'll just throw a number out, $3.5 million, $4 million on a player. The expectation that comes with that is that player is a difference maker, right? That player is going to be a guy who, in Michigan State's case, when we look at their team and how it appears to be shaping up, would firmly stamp you, okay, that's a guy who could make the difference between you being a second weekend team and a champion.
Right.
Finishing second in the Big Ten or winning it, right? That would be kind of what goes along with that. And I'm just talking about in terms of what the reasonable inferences to draw would be. I don't know that I believe that about Aiden Sherrell.
Right. Yeah.
Aiden Sherrell's a very talented kid offensively. He could shoot. He would be a floor stretcher for sure. He's 6'11". He's big. Frankly, I think a little too big. When I saw him play for Alabama, I did not feel he looked to me like he was in optimal condition. So I think that's something you'd have to work at. That could get resolved. Michigan State does a pretty good job with that. But that's how it was. I don't know that he rebounds quite as well as you'd like for a guy his size. Maybe he'd be better at Michigan State. I don't know. But the big thing to me is the defensive end. I saw no indication that he's anywhere close to being good enough for what Michigan State needs. Now, are there things you could do? Maybe you can cross match with a Cam Ward in a way that it works, that Cam's the guy who's handling pick and roll defense more regularly, and Sherrell would be playing more of the role that, say, Jaxon Kohler did. Maybe that's an option. Maybe you get Aiden Sherrell on a fast track, and over 5 months, you get him to be functional. Can't rule it out. I can just tell you that the history suggests that's unlikely.
It's a gamble,
too. Not with him. I mean the history with anybody.
Yeah, right.
You just saw different position and different expectations and needs and all that, but you just saw it with Trey Fort.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do. And the 5 is a more demanding and critical position defensively than the 2. So you got a lot of people out there who see a name they recognize from a school they recognize, and the fact that Michigan State 2 years ago recruited the kid at a high school, and they assume that not only is that the move Michigan State would want to make, but that it's the right one. I am not convinced. Let's just say I'm skeptical. That does not mean I definitively think it will not work. I am skeptical. I have questions about that. I kind of think Michigan State's got questions about it. And that's why I'm not remotely convinced that that's the move they're ultimately going to make.
Yeah.
That's going to anger some people. I know I don't care. And I sure as hell know Tom Izzo doesn't care.
Yeah.
Tom Izzo's going to do what he thinks is right for this team. So I don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, the other name, of course, being bandied about is Bidunga, who was also recruited by Michigan State.
That's not being bandied. It's being bandied about by morons. There's no, there's absolutely zero. There's no evidence that they have looked at him, talked to him. They recruited him out of high school too. And he's from Indiana. And he is a guy who I think would make some sense defensively. That's the difference there. But there's no indication Michigan State's made contact, and I don't expect them to. I think that this is the interesting thing about Bidunga. And I've mentioned this a couple times on the mag board. It's the most under-discussed element of that whole deal and I'm not sure why. It's all a big mystery to me. Bidunga's been at Kansas.
They're pretty good.
Kansas is known, well, more than just good. Kansas is known as a place that supports its basketball program, both in the pre-NIL days and in the NIL period. Okay? There is zero indication that they are doing anything to keep him. In fact, the direct quote I got the other day from someone I was talking to, this came up, not with regard to Michigan State, just generally, is Bill Self doesn't care. Okay, that's interesting to me. It's interesting to me because he's a starter. He's a high-profile player. He's a good defender, which Bill Self cares about too, just like Tom Izzo does. Why? Why does Bill Self not care? And if you argue, well, we don't know that. Well, what we do know is there's absolutely zero word that Kansas is doing anything to try to keep him.
Yeah. Why?
I don't pretend to know the answer. I just think it's really, really weird. And really, there's something in all of that.
That's a red flag,
I don't know
right?
what that is, but there's something there. So no, that's not happening. Michigan State's not in that one. It's not happening. So forget that one. There are two names that I've heard legitimately with some where I sensed there was at least some reason to think that there might be a possibility. The kid from North Dakota State and Aiden Sherrell.
Yeah.
I've heard nothing on either one that tells me it's likely to happen quickly or maybe even at all.
Yep.
Now, the one hypothetical that I talked about with someone I spoke to the other night, and neither one of us had any answers there. We both agreed it kind of made some sense on the surface, but I don't know that they're going to do it. If I were trying to attack this in a way that I think would check the most boxes for what I think Tom Izzo's priorities are. So what are those? You've got a chance to at least be functional defensively right away.
Yep.
If you're not, if you're putting a guy at the 5 who can't guard like at all is a negative, you're further away from competing for a national title, not closer. And I don't care what he does with a jumper.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom
Exactly.
line.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. So someone who's functional defensively, someone who can and will rebound, and someone who's going to fit the culture, meaning they're a hard worker, they're focused on getting better, they're a good teammate, and they're not going to compel you to pay wild money that's going to run the risk of, in your view, as Tom Izzo, poisoning or damaging your locker room. To me, the best approach to answer as many of those boxes, check as many of those off as you could, probably is in Europe.
Right.
I am pretty certain that and it doesn't mean you got to go get a 26-year-old. I'm pretty certain somewhere in the former Yugoslavia or in the Baltic states, somewhere, there's a 19-year-old who could do most of those things at a level that Tom Izzo would be good with, who would also fit the cultural stuff and wouldn't cost $4 million. Now, who that player is, I can't tell you. I don't know if they're looking at that. I don't, and the person I was talking to didn't have a good read on it either. I know they looked at some European kids last year.
Right.
They kicked the tires, decided not to offer anybody. Are they going back to that well? Are they going more seriously into it? I don't know. I personally, is only my opinion, which is worth nothing more than me talking about it right now, and that's it. I think that would be the best approach. You know, I look at a kid like Merkovic at Illinois.
Yeah, right.
And I think, is that a guy that I could see Tom Izzo liking? Yeah. And I think he's 19.
Yeah.
So,
Now he is, yeah.
those that kind of player I do think is out there. And if they're not putting a lot into that, I think that might be a missed opportunity, because I just in my gut, I feel like the odds of finding a solution that he'd like is better there than in the portal. But I don't know that he believes that. And that's all that counts.
Right.
So, yeah, there's no hard and fast on anything right now, other than I think everybody's convinced they're going to add someone. But is it somebody that's going to win the press conference? If I were betting, I'd bet no.
Well, that's almost a certainty that people are going to be upset. If it's not Bidunga, for a lot of people, it's a failure.
No,
it's poverty.
Sherrell
might be okay. Yeah.
No, not okay. Sherrell absolutely would have the fan base on X and people who value the wrong things would have them ecstatic.
Yeah, right.
That would win Sherrell would absolutely win the press conference. I'm not remotely convinced it would help them win actual games to the level we're talking about, though. That's a me thing. But I also kind of think that's going to be an Izzo thing in the end, because I'm assuming that Izzo puts the pieces together the way I think he does. Whereas, what is this guy as a player? Where can we get him? By when? And is all that worth the money it's going to take to get him? And that's where I get my skepticism on that happening, is putting all of those pieces together. But that would absolutely win the press conference, because most of these people focus on where a guy was evaluated out of high school,
right,
and how did he shoot?
Yeah,
well,
right.
Sherrell checks those boxes. Can he guard somebody? I mean, he's got good shot blocking numbers. It's not like he does nothing defensively, but shot blocking does not have inherently a direct relationship to being a good defensive five at Michigan State.
Right.
That's not even the beginning of the discussion.
Yeah. Well, we'll be back.
We'll see.
We'll be back next week, obviously, and maybe we'll have some answers. Maybe we'll have some names. I don't know. We kind of play by ear at this point, part of the season, and so make sure you stay tuned in. If you've not yet subscribed to the show, obviously make sure you do that in your podcast player. Leave a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate it. And of course, visit all our great sponsors: FanDuel at FanDuel Sportsbook. You've got Brothers Just Do Gutters, Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids, and Nudge Printing. You find those all, of course, at our support page. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.